Remax Drive-In Restaurant was a Pigeon Forge institution. It opened in 1961 in the era of big Chevrolets, rock and roll, and cruisin', the same year that Pigeon Forge became a city. Two couples seized this business opportunity when Pigeon Forge was struggling to establish itself as a vacationing city, the same as Gatlinburg, its big sister city down the road. Mr. Bill McCarter was the projectionist for the Midway Drive-In Theater next door. He and his wife Della joined with business partners Newt and Becky Reagan and opened Remax Drive-In Restaurant. Re for Reagan and Mac for McCarter. Remax. The Reagans sold their interest after about a year, and the restaurant became a McCarter family operation that continued until the early 1980s.
Remax, the first part, Reagan, and the last part, McCarter. Remax. That's how we chose it. We moved to Pigeon Forge. Bill and I, when we got married, we moved to Pigeon Forge when we were about 20, and that's when Pigeon Forge at that time, this is what every old-timer said, at that time Pigeon Forge was a place to go through to get to Gatlinburg. Very, very few things. Remax, Green Valley Restaurant and Trotters, we were the only restaurants in Pigeon Forge. At that time, of course, there was a motel or two going up at that time. But that was in the early 60s now when we built. I forgot about the roller skating rink. It was over on River Road, not far from there, almost directly across from us, but we could not see it, but it was on River Road. The drive-in theater, that's where my late husband worked. That's why we came to Pigeon Forge at that time, was he still worked there. That's where he worked, and he still worked there for some time after we built Remax. Of a night he would work there and be at the restaurant of a day.
When the McCarters and Reagans opened Remax, business was a much more personal affair.
The property our restaurant was built on belonged to J. Hugh Connor, Mr. and Ms. J. Hugh Connor. That's Dan's late parents. Marvelous people, just dear. They were the grandparents I never had. We would go to pay our rent each month, and we couldn't leave. We'd have to sit on the porch and talk with them for hours. They were dear. They would not sell property in Pigeon Forge. You leased. And we had a 25-year lease.
Della McCarter's parents moved to this side of the Great Smoky Mountains, and her father worked on the road across the Smokies. Bill McCarter's parents lived in the Banner community.
Bill McCarter. His parents were Bill and Beulah McCarter. He was raised in the Banner area just below Gatlinburg and went to school there in Gatlinburg. But that's where he was raised.
Mrs. Della's husband Bill worked for the Midway Drive-In Theater in Pigeon Forge before he and the Reagans opened Remax. The Great Smoky Mountains was transforming, the same as the rest of the United States, into a more mobile society. Families watched movies from their cars. They ate in their automobiles, and they stayed in motor courts.
When he was still in high school, he started working for Mr. Bill Mills. He had the theater in Gatlinburg, the only theater at that time. That's where he learned to be a projectionist. He got his training there, and then when the Midway was built, yes, it was built before we built our restaurant. He worked there for a few years and continued after we built the restaurant for a while. I do not know the year it was built, but a dear gentleman, his name was Mr. Wilson, came here from Greenville, Tennessee, and built it. And that's who he worked for. Of course, he just leased from the Connors also, the ground.
Opening a business in Pigeon Forge just as the town was created took fortitude and vision. The McCarters and the Reagans had both. They put hard work into their vision, and a successful business was born in Pigeon Forge.
Well, as a teenager, when I was 16 years old, my brother and his wife, Major Carr and Veta Carr, owned a motel in Gatlinburg, and they let me stay with them in the summer, and I worked at the 2 or 3 of the bigger restaurants in Gatlinburg at that time, and I loved it. I loved it, and I do not know when and why we decided to build Remax, but Bill really loved the business also, and I even miss it today.
The McCarters operated Remax drive-in restaurant with the Reagans that first year. It was a time of putting into practice what the two families had learned as employees of other area businesses.
Yes, Becky and Newt Reagan, dear people. Bill had worked with her there at she was in charge of the concession at the Midway Theater, the drive-in theater there, for several years, and that's where we got to know her so well and liked her so much. And yes, they were our partners for a year, and it just did not work out. They just, and her husband had never been around that kind of business or anything and all, and it just did not work out, and we bought them out in a year, and then it was just Bill and I.
The McCarters and the Reagans plunged into the business all the way. They had no hesitation about building a full-service restaurant with the drive-in attached.
No. We did it all. I don't know why we decided. I do not know. I cannot tell you that. Johnson's was already in Gatlinburg, but nothing like that in Pigeon Forge, and we thought it would go over big, and it did. Oh, yeah, we couldn't have had a better spot. We all sat down together and decided together. We always did everything together as long as Becky. Newt did not take, her husband did not take a big part in things like that. No, he did, that was not his cup of tea. But Becky and me and Bill, and she knew I had worked in 2 or 3 really nice restaurants in Gatlinburg in the summer, and she knew I knew a little bit about things and all. We decided everything together. People could see that what we were starting and all, and people just start coming around, you know, to get our business. You know, we do this. We are a jobber out of Knoxville. The gentleman that we bought phones from was in Maryville. He was coming through the little wasn't even a paved road then, and he saw what we were doing, and he said, "Oh, I can supply you with your phones." We had phones on both sides of the restaurant, and then a little bit later on we saw how popular they were, and then we added phones all across the back, the big back lot. I want to think just on both sides, I think we might have had, I do not know the exact amount, I would say about 15 or 20 on the side, both sides, equally on both sides, on each side, and then later on added 3 times that many or 2.5 times that many on the back. And so popular, so popular for the teenagers. Oh, that was the big thing. I have a story to tell you about the paving. We were people that did not like to be in debt much and all, and we would pave. Blaylocks would come and pave as we could afford to pay for it. It was terribly expensive then. Can you imagine compared to now? But we would pave as we could afford to pay for the paving.
Opening a business is a huge risk. There are many questions in the minds of a first-time owner. Yet for Mrs. Della McCarter, she began her first day with a cool head.
Well, I'd always been around people, you know, had served the public in the restaurants in Gatlinburg. I was not nervous at all because that's all I had ever done from the time I was a junior in high school, working in those large restaurants in Gatlinburg, 2 of the largest, Nyman's Good Food, and then Howard's big restaurant there in Gatlinburg, 2 of the bigger restaurants at that time. I was not nervous. He sort of depended on me to greet the people. Bill depended on me to greet the people and things like that because he says that's your cup of tea. We had, you know, lived there and went to First Baptist Church in Pigeon Forge and knew so many people, and everybody knew we were getting ready to open. I don't think we were afraid we weren't going to have any business. We had marvelous people that worked for us. Oh my goodness, there is no way to tell you. And we had people older than we were that did the meals. We had home cooked meals every day, plus all the burgers, the french fries, onion rings, everything like that and all that any fast food restaurant would have. But we had the home cooked meals and all, and we had people much older than us, ladies older than us, did all of that cooking, the home cooked meals, and that's what people swarmed to get. Lucille Watson, Liz Cogdell, Dorothy Fox, marvelous employees. Every employee we had. stayed with us. Lucille Watson did the home cooking, things like that, and others would help her make the pies and the coleslaw and things like that. Elizabeth and Nina McCarter. Elizabeth married a Sutton. Nina was a Myers. Yes, they both started with us, and they were there. Of course, tragically, we lost Elizabeth, my late husband's sister, at 31 years old of cancer. But Nina stayed with us till the very end. She was one of the, they were in charge when I could not be there. And Frida Parton, I forgot her, she was very, very important also. Bud Parton's wife. Bud was alive then. Bud Parton was a detective in Gatlinburg Police Department for many, many years, and his wife Frida was very popular in our business. So dependable when, those three were in charge when when me and the two girls would go on vacation or anything, They were the ones in charge. They were marvelous, hard workers, dependable. I don't think we ever had many employees that weren't dependable, loved their jobs, and could depend on them for any and everything. We treated everybody as family. So many, yes, Agnes Bradley, Cheryl Bradley's wife, Henrietta Reagan from Gatlinburg, marvelous employees. I couldn't name them all. Zola, they were Whaley. Zola was a Whaley. They were, I can't remember, what were their maiden names? We had two or three of the sisters. Okay. Oh yes, Willardine, oh marvelous. That's where she met her husband, Bobby Quarles, right there in our restaurant. Oh, and the coleslaw, all the baskets, the shrimp basket, any and everything. You can mention anything. Oh, the best I've ever put in my mouth. Please, are you going to ever have another Remax?
Pigeon Forge residents and residents from all across the county wish that they could cruise Remax and stop in for burgers, fries, and floats yet today. The memories of those drive-in days whet the appetite and wake up the taste buds. Owners kept their recipes a secret to make their meals truly unique to Remax, and the secret is still not shared.
That's one thing that we did not give away. That's one thing that we did not give away. The fact that the employees stayed with us forever, and it was always the same people doing the cooking, is why it tasted the same all the time. We treated all employees as family. We treated them all equally.
In those earlier times, restaurants had discovered that the little mini burgers were a hit.
At one time, when they became popular in Knoxville and various places and all, we did that for a while. It went over very, very big. 10 for $1. Just like they did everywhere else, 10 for $1. Believe me, some people would, give me 30, give me 40. We bought all of our meat from Travis Meat and Seafood Company in Knoxville. All of our meat came from there. And we knew we were getting the very best. We got the very best. And the very same people fixing the food every day. And they could come and then 6 months later come and get another one, and they knew they were getting the very same thing. No difference in the taste. But we bought the very best meats and the seafoods and the sausages. We served 3 meals a day. Oh, when we first opened, we opened at 5 o'clock in the morning. One of us was always there, most of the time, both of us, till 10, 11, somewhere along there. The seasons had a lot to do with it. When we first opened, we did not stay open the year round. None of the places in town did at that time. It was seasonal then. No, and we would close in the winter. And one or two of our employees, especially Dot Fox, we would close in the winter, and she'd want to stay at our home all winter long with us. Our employees were family. We treated them all as family. That's the secret, treating everybody equally. We were making a profit within a 2-year period. That's unheard of in businesses today. May I tell you how we got our start? My late husband had worked for Mr. Bill Mills, the president of First National Bank in Gatlinburg, from a teenager. Mr. Mills started training him in his theater. Well, he was the president of the bank in Gatlinburg. He loaned us a certain amount of money, and we paid him back every penny we owed him in a 2.5-year period. It was never going dead any longer, like I say. We paved as we could afford to pay for it.
Teenagers loved Remax. The music of the jukebox inside flowed through the outdoor speakers and livened a Saturday night.
Teenagers, oh my goodness. It was the only place in Pigeon Forge for teenagers. But of course, church would be out on Sunday and our place would fill up. Every age group but teenagers. It was for teenagers because we had the jukebox inside. But all the speakers outside also had music. They could play music from the outside. That was the big thing at that time, too.
Families stuffed their old model cars full for the Midway drive-in next door, since movies were priced by the carload. Teenagers and families, too, would stop by for burgers before the show.
Oh my goodness. I would say everybody, one person would order for the whole car. The car would be full. They could get in for a certain price at certain nights. A car full. Every person did not have to pay. You know, that's unheard of today. But oh, they would get a load of food, and we knew exactly what time he was going to start the film, and everybody knew in the county. It was the only theater in the area then, other than the little one in Gallenberg, and eventually it went out of business.
During these busy times, Remax placed 2 or 3 car hops on the curb to move diners in and out before the movies.
And it was really, really busy. You had more than one. You had to. And then after we added the back phones, the call-in phones, you know, you had to have more than one. But Dot Fox was our best car hop, and she came to us when she graduated from high school, and she was with us forever. And another thing too, after they saw that we were going to sell out, I told them all, and it just about, they were so saddened. They had been there all their lives, a lot of them, and their children, and all the Whaleys, Barbara Whaley, and all of her brothers and sisters, all of her cousins, and eventually worked for us in our restaurant and all. After they saw that I was going to sell the restaurant, I told all of them, I said, I'll help you find a job somewhere else. And I helped everyone that wanted to get another job, find another job. I would go with them for interviews or call on the phone, you know, and ask, you know, if there were vacancies in their businesses and all. And most of them stayed with them until they retired, a lot of them. The jobs that I helped them find, I was so happy to help them.
The telephone operator at Remax Drive-In was busy keeping track of orders during peak times. Customers sometimes interrupted the orders of burgers, shakes, and chili dogs with prank calls from the curb.
You had one person usually that did the phone service and all, and they recognized voices. And they would know it was a crank call. And it could get rather hectic around there. You had to have a lot of employees for that big dining room. And hostesses, you had to have hostesses. Grace Whaley, Bert Whaley's widow, she worked as hostess for me for many, many years. As long as she was able, and the many wonderful people that did that. And you had to have a cashier, and sometimes such a booming business, and that was a big thing. Really, that type of business was a big thing. And two, there was no fast food chains in the county at that time. We were the only one of that type. And Jerry Bradley, Dr. Bradley, you know him. Jackie Parton, our superintendent of schools. Jimbo Whaley, that is a great, great singer, very popular, and all the Whaleys worked for us in time. They were very young. They were still in school, all of them, when they worked. All the Bradley boys worked for us. Wow. Cheryl and Agnes, his sons, Dr. Bradley, and then his brothers, his two brothers, all the parents would come to us and say, we always had a security man on the property. And the parents would say, we're not afraid for our teenagers to hang out at your all's drive-in because we know either you or Bill 1 is going to be there, and there's always a security man there. We know that there will be no problems there. I said, no. And we never had a problem like that. Never, never. We were so lucky in the fact that we just had marvelous people to see that nothing happened. They knew that one of us was always there. And then after Bill passed away, we were there a long time after I stayed there. as did all my employees, stayed with me. No, we were there a long time after Bill passed. We were there over 20 years.
Bill and Della McCarter were the parents of 3 daughters. The oldest, Peggy Lynn, died with cerebral palsy, and the middle daughter, Debbie, was born just before Remax opened. Debbie and the youngest daughter, Libby, grew up as their parents operated one of the county's favorite teenage hangouts.
Our oldest daughter, who has passed now, she had cerebral palsy. She was born before we opened the restaurant, but Debbie and Libby were born after. After Debbie and Libby got old enough to work, I did not tell them they had to work for me. I asked them if they wanted to work in the restaurant, and they both wanted to. We had a maid at home, but they liked to come at times, and we did not let them run wild, and I did not let them run wild in the restaurant. We had a big office, and they would play in the office, and we'd let them be in the dining room a lot and all, but we did not let them. Oh, Libby and Debbie was, of course, Peggy Lynn had cerebral palsy. We lost her as a young girl. She was a marvelous, precious child. And Debbie and Libby, after they became old enough to want to work in the restaurant, I did not say, you have to work here with me. They wanted to work there, and they were treated exactly the same as the other employees, and the other employees saw that they were treated exactly the same as the 2 daughters, and that's why I think they loved us so much, loved me so good, because I treated them all equally. And I was a boss that never raised my voice. If I needed to talk something over with an employee, we would go to the office and talk it over. I was not that kind of an employer. I don't like seeing that in a business. It did not go in my business. And we had a lot of fellas as waiters also. Fellas like to do that type of work also. Very good little waiters. You know, people like to see that also. Like to see fellas in the dining room, not just in the kitchen and on the curb and things. And I've had fellas work the curb occasionally.
Remax restaurant sat along the parkway with a handful of other businesses that were breaking ground for Pigeon Forge tourism. This was in the days when vacationers drove along in front of Remax and farmers fed hay to cattle behind the business.
Ted Reagan had his TV place next door on one side. Paul Whaley had his big gift shop on one side. The Connors had a motel directly across from us. The Trotters were 4 or 5 buildings down. Well, Dan Connor had a big motel, his brother had a big motel, and then Trotter's restaurant. Later on, you know, they built the motels and everything and all, but of course Trotters and us in Green Valley were the only 3 big restaurants at that time. They built the Apple Tree Inn later on, and of course Garnett and Kyle Cole bought it over the years and ran it.
Vacationers loved Remax the same as the locals. The McCarter family and their employees made friends with those who visited Remax year after year.
My goodness, after we began going big and all, and we would have them, they would remember us and come back from year to year to year. And you know, we would remember faces a lot of times. I would say, if I were in the dining room walking around the cash register, walking around talking to people in the dining room, I remember you. Well, you were here last year, weren't you? And they'd say, yes, we eat with you every time we're in the area.
Remax was the place for dating couples. It was also a favorite hangout for friends. Boys cruised Remax to meet girls, and girls cruised Remax to meet guys. Some couples met at Remax, dated over shakes, and finally married.
Oh, so many people met their spouses there. And right this minute, I can't think of a name, but I've had several of them tell me. Earlene Teaster, our city manager, I think that's where she met her husband. That happened to so many people. The stories I've heard over the years, I am sorry, I can't remember names and all, but so many met their spouses. Like I told you a while ago, Earlene, I saw all of you all grow up right there. Willadine, that's where she met Bobby. Bobby Quarles right there in our restaurant. Several people met their spouses right there and married them later on. And the parents always commented, we aren't afraid for the children to come, our daughters to come there and with their boyfriends or to meet them there, because we know that one of you, that Bill was still alive at that time, and we know you or him one are always there, and we know you have a security man just walking the premises, and we know they'll be all right there. We're not worried about them when they're there.
Remax Restaurant will be remembered by Pigeon Forge's teenagers of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The drive-in was there through the Kennedy years in the White House, through the Vietnam War, and through the happy times in between. Mrs. McCarter, her family, and her staff spent many long and busy days so that their customers would have good memories at Remax.
Restaurant work is hard work, but it's just like police work. It gets in your bloodstream. I loved every minute I spent there. I even miss it today. I loved it. Was hard work. Yes, it was hard work, long hours, but I loved every minute of it. I think
So-
we both did.